From my point of view as not a believer, but an entertainer of time wave theory, is life has become this weird confirming spectacle. As I watch everything go on, I'm asking questions nobody else, I think, could hardly imagine. Like, is the reason her dress is cut that way because she is an echo of Franklin the Fat's wife, Angelina? And similar quasi-schizoid ruminations in which what I'm always trying to do is see the echoes. And I see people come to me and stand in front of me, and I see the flicker of Blake, or the crooked smile of Jefferson, or the glinty gaze of Sade, and it all comes mixed together. And then I find myself in situations which are rehearsals of other historical events. And other people do this, but they don't understand how it sounds to me. Like yesterday on our hike, someone kept saying, was it you? Kept saying, the tribe marches south, or something like that, echoing the great pilgrimages in the history of South Africa, right? When various people moved south, the Great Trek. But then, of course, in American history, there are many great treks. And of course, what is history but great treks on one level? Well, so to the time wave informed mind, this seemingly trivial remark is incredibly rich, because in some way we are repeating the Great Trek. Everything becomes paradigmatic. Every action is somehow what it is, but also the morphogenetic ghosts of other times and other places. A human body incarnated in time is an extraordinary tool for understanding being and meaning. The distinction between adult and child is largely artificial. In other words, much of the world confuses me. Much of social situations, sexual dealings, drugs, I find myself wishing somebody had educated and explained it all to me. You don't ever suddenly understand, we all carry with us into life blank spots in our understanding. So I consider myself at age 50 to be in a state of prolonged adolescence and ever learning and assimilating and passing on to young people, which is, I don't say child, I don't say adolescent, I say young people, whatever I know, and learning from them similarly to get connected up. My life is like science fiction. I feel, I don't know, the word trapped is slightly paranoid, but I feel enclosed within something like a Philip K. Dick novel. With the advice of Phil K. Dick, James and Nora Joyce are actually running my reality. I don't know about your reality. The tension in my personal life is I was an odd vessel for this job. I am an extremely rugose and tormented creature, a double Scorpio and Catholic upbringing, and I see every situation from 15 points of view, and I can't get rid of it. I can't get rid of this the complications in existence. And so what it's come down to for me is I've had to realize that it's very hard to do shamanic research and be a missionary and a propagandist. But so that's my dilemma, how to do what I've been doing for years, which is the only thing I understand, is talking to people and that sort of thing. I would starve under a bridge if I couldn't do this, because I'm too something for organizational or institutional life. Everything I am and have discussed with you and so forth was developed away from the public eye. And the other thing is, being a public figure is a really stupid thing to be. You participate in some of the sleaziest and most tainted machinery of the culture, and you see how people are manipulated. You see what the cult of celebrity is and how people are invited to disempower themselves in its presence. My function is to sort of serve as an information nexus for data on psychedelic plants and chemistry and narrative, and to just sort of encourage people to explore their own minds and so forth and so on. It's been said that of all cultural institutions, the classroom has changed least in the last 200 years. Things are pretty strange in this world, and people do it many ways, and you are just an atom in a galaxy of possibilities, and your opinions and your science and what I think and all that is just so much noise in a very complex and busy world. And it's that same humbling perception, I think, that comes out of psychedelics. It just shows you, you're very parochial. This thing for which we take such responsibility, called human history, is actually not our fault. That it had to do with being caught in a kind of magnetic field in local space that propelled genetic material toward novelty. In other words, human history is not the record of human decisions, efforts, so forth and so on. Human history is the record of the imprint upon human beings of something else's plans, dreams, hopes, and intentionality. That about 5 million years ago, give or take a million, choose a number, the quietly carrying on primates of Africa fell, if you will, like under the spell of something. They could smell something in the air, like 25,000 years or 250,000 years in the future, but they caught the odor on the air. The wildebeest didn't, the gazelle didn't, the lion didn't, but the primates did. And one thing led to another is about what it comes down to. One campfire speculation led to another. One decision to push beyond the normal limits of the tribal turf led to another. And at the behest of some wavering image, some immense protean thing. I mean, for most of human history, it's just been simply called God. But I don't think it's the God that hung the stars like lamps in heaven, as in Milton's phrase. That seems a bit much to ask, since the universe is vast. I mean, galaxies like grains of sand, and so whither you and I. But it may be that there is a kind of local God, the God of biology. A God for whom the fate of the earth is of extreme importance, not one of myriads strewn across the light years, but the entire playpen and investment. And this Gaian mind, if intelligence could emerge in us, it could emerge in some other form, and perhaps we're wrong to expect it to always emerge expressed through technology and language in a particulate species. If that's how it always does it, then nature waited a long time to play this trick. In other words, for 600 million years, the conquest of the terrestrial environment by life has been underway. Well then, is it only in the last 6 million years that anything like intelligence would emerge? And then only in one species? Because nature is incredibly redundant. Any strategy which works is usually iterated again and again and again. Well, then people say, well, dolphins and this and that and the other. Maybe. or perhaps, new laws are new domains of potential openness are occurring as the universe ages, and complexity previously disallowed is now possible. And we are that complexity. We are nature moving out of its genetic phase, a phase under the control of chemical genes, which are physical structures, into an epigenetic phase, a phase of culture ruled by codes, transformable, culturally confined codes, mathematics, religion, philosophy, art, dance, humor. For what purpose? Well, who knows? As I said, there are people in Silicon Valley who go to work every day believing they serve the great work. And they refer to the great work as the passing on of intelligence to machines that can appreciate it. It's wasted on a monkey. They are scum. But machines will appreciate it. Well, I don't know whether that's where it's going. I think it's more like a meltdown, that intelligence will always have the stamp of humanness on it wherever it now goes, this particular branch of intelligence. Remember when I said the entire conquest of life on land occupied the last 600 million years and it was almost a straight curve into novelty? Here it is again. You see, because the time wave is a fractal, it has resonances at many levels. The same patterns occur on many, many levels. This is an opportunity or a way of offering an explanation for such puzzling phenomena as fads and fashions. If suddenly we're all putting claws on our bathtub legs, clearly something has happened in the mass mind. Well, according to this theory, we're in resonance with some historical period in the past where clawed bathtubs made perfect sense. So as I've gotten this down to an aphorism, which is, Rome falls 9 times an hour. And your job as you clean up in the kitchen and fold your socks and go to your job is to feel every time it falls. And everything else happening. Everything happens 9 times an hour and once a day and twice a week and 3 times a year. It's all going by on different scales. And what the actual experience of being alive is being embedded in this standing waveform of temporal interference. In linear theory, the most important moment in terms of its effect on this moment is the moment which just preceded this moment. But in this theory, it says, no, the most important moment shaping this moment is a galaxy of moments scattered through time, some of them millions of years ago, some of them seconds ago, some of them centuries ago, and together they create the incredibly rich, affect-laden environment that we call being a thinking human being paying attention. You see? So in the same way that the conquest of terrestrial Earth by life forms occupied a curve like this, so too did the Greek-initiated rush toward natural science and global civilization. They followed a similar curve at different scales. A social movement is only the sum total of individual attitudes. For example, the 60s in the US, what made that so crazy was the government wanted to fight a war which the people didn't want. So it was a moment where the government really wanted the people to pull together and follow it down this certain path. And instead, the children of the war planners were manufacturing LSD and giving it out at college. And they said, and that just enraged them because it eroded this consensus that they were trying to build. A democratic consensus for war is as ugly as a Nazi consensus for war. I mean, you get people in stadiums chanting death to the enemy. That's an ugly sight, no matter who the enemy is and no matter who the people doing the chanting are. And for that kind of mass-mindedness where people are actually ready to die for some bullshit trip they can't even understand, you have to have a kind of mass hysteria. And psychedelics cause people to say, you know, I mean, like, take Vietnam, for example. Vietnam, you want to go kill some brown people and then die in a ditch with your brain shot out and you're 24 years old? Does that sound like fun? No, but if you listen to enough political demagoguery, it sounds like you'll be a man, it's insane. There are all kinds of situations in which the goals of society do not serve the individual. This is something we talked about on the first day, and it's a funny message to give anywhere in the world now, and maybe even slightly odder in South Africa, because there's so much stress here on cultural identity. And everybody wants to think they're a tribe. The Afrikaners, everybody. But culture is not your friend. Culture it's like a Masonic order lurking around that wants to induct you into a bunch of weird ceremonies that you may not really be comfortable with. You know, I think when you get to be approximately my age, and maybe some people get there sooner than I did, you begin to realize all this, that so much of social existence is an inconvenient con and an intrusion on your identity and your freedom, and then you just say, well, I'm not going to do it anymore. I may not even work as hard as you want me to, and I'm certainly not going to fight your wars, and I'm not going to design your war machine, and I'm not going to joyfully pay your taxes, and I'm not going to affirm your community values. Piss on it, you know, con 20-year-olds, but I've been through it, I've had it, I've been around the block too many times to once again be led into the alley by the government and the church to be beat up on. And the great thing about the youth culture is I think they're figuring this out without putting in 30 years in the corporation, the army, the university, and all that other bunkum. It's baloney. And, you know, we are very uncomfortable. I mean, yes, we have Mercedes and we have jacuzzis and we have this, but is it worth it? Does it make you feel, you know, can you face yourself in the mirror? You know, they want your life and they pay in garbage. They have no other medium of exchange to pay in. All they can give you is stuff. All they can do is appeal to your object fetishism. And of course, it is completely unsatisfying. The number of suicides, divorces, so forth and so on are testament to the fact that that cultural style is completely bankrupt. One thing we need to do is, by strongly rejecting it, you know, I was thinking, I don't know if I said this to you, I can't remember what I think in my room and what I say to you guys, but I was thinking this thing recently somewhere about how the smarter you are, the funnier it seems. It's almost an index of intelligence. The level of hilarity you perceive in the situation. People who have the right idea can hardly keep from giggling aloud as they walk around doing their daily business. And I think if you correctly assimilate the time wave, you will laugh aloud. You know, you will laugh aloud. Just as Oscar Wilde said, Oscar Wilde said you'd have to have a heart of stone to not have laughed aloud when you heard of the death of little Nell. You see, people say, well, but the world is in a terrible situation. Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, and in the first place, what can you do about it? One thing that really impresses me is how immune to noticing change people are. There has been enormous change in this world in the last 10 years. The whole Soviet Union thing, which basically was the threat of thermonuclear war on every man, woman, and child on the planet. I grew up with it. We thought we would live with it to eternity. It disappeared, and nobody basically even gave a shit or could bother to write an article analyzing what happened. You people have an amazing capacity for being sanguine. I mean, the number of people who have told me, well, you know, nothing's really changed. It's all been sort of, really? Great. If you can pull this kind of stuff off and walk around telling yourself nothing has really changed, that's pretty good protection against panic and hysteria, I would think. But if every society could change as much as you have in the past 10 years and walk around telling visitors, well, you know, it's really business as usual, they just sort of twiddled the players, an astonishing assertion. And I have Russian friends who come and visit me, and I want to know about Yeltsin and Zhirinovsky and this and that. And they say, well, you know, it's just really, it hasn't changed much. It's same old, same old. I saw graffiti once on a wall in Colombia, and it said, it had a picture of the mushroom, and it said in Spanish, without this, you are not yourself. You know, accepting that idea would change our relationship to the whole question of drugs, because we're told, you know, unintoxicated, unstoned, as you stand here, you are somehow the beloved of the Almighty. Loaded, you are somehow the scourge of the earth. Well, this would play with those categories and give us a different relationship to what we call intoxication. We're over time. It's fascinating. On the other hand, we have days of this ahead of us, and I'm usually available in the bar in the evenings and the mornings. Thank you for your attention to all of this. Thank you. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, it's total chaos. And what governments do is manage chaos by telling everybody it's okay, watch TV. Here we spent $500 million to make a movie for you about flying saucers. Now watch it, now talk about it, now think about it, leave us alone. You know, people are being drugged, entertained, lied to, delayed, deferred, misdirected, propagandized, used, abused. But nobody has a clue as to where we're going. Meanwhile, there's this inner dynamic to things. Guys with ponytails just keep inventing weird stuff and handing it out on the internet. And other guys and women keep making strange substances and peddling them in remote parts of the world. And people keep making strange music and dancing and subverting. And this is where the dynamic will come from. Anybody who says they have a plan at this point is just standing in the way. The plan will emerge out of the youth culture, out of the dynamic of the situation. Because the shaman's concern is the care of the community, not the making of money or the promoting of a given class or something like that, but the care of the community. And we have immense power. We, human beings, have immense power and immense goodness in it. But standing between us and the goodness is the trauma of the historical experience. And to overcome that, we are simply going to have to change our minds. It's the hardest thing to change minds. And you can do it sometimes with rational argument on some small area. Like if I spend 9 hours, maybe I can convince you to switch your medical plan or something. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about changing our attitude toward what it is to be a human being on this planet. And the only thing I've seen that works fast enough, because if we had 1,000 years, you know, we could hold weekends and do things and slowly, but we don't have that kind of time. So what works is chemical intervention, shamanic intervention, Aboriginal intervention on modern pathology. The modern mind has served its purpose. As a raft, it has carried us across the wide, swift-running river of history. And now it should be abandoned. It's become toxic. It doesn't serve anymore. The I Ching says, after an exceptional effort, ordinary conditions should be restored as quickly as possible. And I think ordinary conditions need to be restored on the planet. And what it means is, dialing back population numbers, disparities in populations, dialing back agriculture, impact on the land, a retreat from the brink of a historical apocalypse created by overpopulation and resource abuse and untrammeled militarism and dominator politics. And the thing that is critical here, and why all governments are nervous in the presence of it, is the psychedelic experience in the environment of youth culture and technology. It just is, it's a dagger pointed at the heart of the old, discredited, and defunct cultural style. And so that's why psychedelics are somehow, I think, a kind of inoculation against paranoia. Paranoia is a failure to perceive the pattern, and instead then to impute, to guess at the pattern. You say, well, I guess the Pope must be running things, or I guess it's the CIA doing it, or something. It means in the absence of understanding, you falter, and then an error of thought. There may be evil in the universe, but what a rough row it has to hoe. You know, I wouldn't bet on it, that's for sure, because the appetite of the universe is for connectivity, novelty, light, meaning, identity. And I do think that optimism is going to be necessary to create a better world. That, you know, pessimists cannot make a better world. Marxists were pessimists, fascists were pessimists, and what they created was nightmarish. So, but then say, well, but we need realists to create a better world. Well, but realists in the modern form tend to be rather down because they're factoid freaks. If I believed this world were controlled by governments, religions, bankers, and large companies, I would be freaked out indeed, slipping from their grip. They have worries, they're poring over maps, they're looking at computer projections, saying, what the hell are we going to do? So they're not gaily conspiring to run the world, they're frantically planning to try and hold on to their own pathetic bit of turf before it's wrest from their grip. In seeking, admittedly as a propagandist, for ways in which I could make the psychedelic experience palatable to the intellectual establishment, I've tried to look at ways that it might have influenced us or contributed to our situation that would appeal to the theater of rational discourse. It's about a primate, poor and of humble origins, who sets out on a great adventure, and along the way there are many pitfalls and there are helpers and hindrances, and finally the great pearl of consciousness is attained and the little primate is vindicated, and so forth and so on. So all evolutionary theory is narrative of this cheerful sort. The human relationship to the grasslands, the mushroom, the cattle began slowly 7 or 8 million years ago, and there was a vectoring of factors together over millions of years, so that by 100,000 years ago, which is my date, but you have nomadic pastoralism. You actually have domesticated cattle, human beings domesticating cattle, living with them in the grassland, in a desert round, in a situation of established tradition and cultural value. Psilocybin measurably increases visual acuity. If you take low doses of it, doses so low that you can't feel them, you do better on standard eye tests. This was demonstrated by Roland Fisher in the 70s. They had an apparatus in which there were 2 parallel bars, and by punching a button, you could signal when the 2 bars were no longer parallel. Consistently, people on low doses of psilocybin could detect this variation before control subjects. And Fisher said to me in his heavy Viennese accent, he said, "And so we see, my young friend, that here we have proof that through the use of the drug, we are getting a better picture of reality than if we leave it alone." Which he thought was a big ha-ha, but which I took very seriously. Because the kind of visionary acuity that's being promoted there is edge detection, which is precisely a lion moving through the tall grass toward you. You get one chance to see it, and if you're dreaming or lose your edge, you're dinner. Similarly, a gazelle sneaking away through the bushes is trying to evade your peripheral vision. You get one shot. If you see it, you eat. If you don't, you don't. So imagine, I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to see that if there was something lying around in the early proto-hominid environment that was like a pair of vegetable binoculars, and these people were hunters, that those who tolerated the psilocybin in the diet would have a measurable advantage over the non-psilocybin using individuals. Increase of visual acuity means greater hunting success. At the second level, psilocybin, like all alkaloids, CNS stimulators, central nervous system stimulators, creates what's called arousal. And arousal is something we're pretty familiar with. I mean, it's a double cappuccino. You're restless, your attention is on the environment, you're moving around, you can feel your body. And in highly sexed animals like primates, it means male erection consistently. Well, so then if you haven't had the good offices of the Church of England and 10,000 years of religion shoved down your throat, usually erection leads to what anthropologists without a trace of humor call increased instance of copulation, which, again, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that increased instance of copulation will lead to increased instance of pregnancy. It's promoting a higher birth rate through a slightly higher sexing of and it's not a problem because the very same people who are having more children seem miraculously to be having better luck hunting because they are seeing better in the field. So they can support the added burden of another child in the course of the lifespan. Well, do the demographic mathematics and you see then that those individuals reluctant to admit psilocybin into their diet would begin to be outbred because their neighbors are having more children than they are and raising them to sexual maturity, which is the name of the game in evolutionary theory, get your offspring to sexual maturity. So there would be a tendency to outbreed the non-psilocybin using members of the population. This sexual stage raises many interesting issues because one of our big problems politically as a species, I'm sure I don't have to tell you, is gender conflicts and the fact that we're not utilizing the female portion of our population, its creativity, its integrity, and so forth, has been through cultural factors messed with and suppressed and all that. So this theory has something to say about this as follows. All primates tend to form male dominance hierarchies. And this simply means that the hard-bodied, long-fanged young males are in charge. They control the females, they control the food supply, they control the elderly, the young, the ill, the homosexual, the handicapped. Everybody is under the thumb of the alpha male and his henchmen in primate land. And that's how it is as we sit here. I mean, we have a bunch of fancy rhetoric and so forth and so on, but basically our world is ruled by mafias run by middle-aged fat guys who have very evil friends who carry out their orders. But we have a lot of conflict about this. Why is it even an issue? Why don't we just accept this level of brutishness? The psilocybin has a very interesting effect on sexual expression. This raising of the level of sexual tension or activity, this arousal phenomenon, in the presence of a psychedelic, which is dissolving boundaries, you can tell by looking at human culture that our sexual behaviors are not under genetic control. And what I mean by that is this most important of all matters in evolution, how we have sex and how we propagate and how we choose mates, there's no rules in the human world. We have monogamy, we have polygamy, we have polyandry, we have cultures where brothers share brides. This is assumed, this is culturally validated. Very interesting that this most important matter is culturally determined in us. Apparently, in the primates, in the advanced primates, the sexual expression is at what I would call near a point of disequilibrium. You know, push somebody just a little bit this way and they're a rabid monogamist. Push them just a little bit this way and they're swinging every Wednesday and Saturday night. The point of all this is our sexual expression is so close to this disequilibrium point that the acceptance of psilocybin into the diet changed the pattern of male dominance. And for perhaps 100,000 years, male dominance was chemically suppressed by an item in the diet. not genetically removed, but chemically suppressed. And I believe that a chimp style gave way in human beings to a bonobo style for as long as the psilocybin using ritual was maintained. Who knows how long, 100,000, 50,000 years. But the point being that it's in that window of opportunity that dance, poetry, theater, altruism, philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, music, everything about us that makes us human emerged in this situation of chemical suppression of male dominance. And I think a kind of equilibrium paradise was reached where men and women were at peace with each other. And so what you do is you look for unsolved problems that this new approach might shed light on. And the number of unsolved problems is not great at this point, maybe a dozen or so, and I could think of 5 of them. But one of them is the origin of consciousness. What happened here? I mean, this planet had been producing chipmunks and birds of paradise and ant colonies cheerfully for hundreds of millions of years without this left-wing swerve into tool-building cognitive systems, energy release, and so forth and so on. What happened? Why did the natural order admit of a creature as bizarre and as at apparent cross purposes as our dear selves? Well, then take away the winds of time, and let's look at an organism, a person, a rhinoceros, and anything. We can say then that this organism is a lower dimensional slice of time, in the same way that the dune is a lower dimensional description of wind. An organism is a lower dimensional description of the phenomenon we call time. And in fact, the mushroom said this to me once. It said, what you call man, we call time. And so it is therefore not so surprising that time, which is something we generate, it's not there in some physical sense. It's something made by bodies, by metabolism. And so it has the structure that it has because the DNA has, over billions of years, arranged itself to reflect the modalities of the medium in which it finds itself. Is that not seemingly obvious? So time as we experience it is really the time of our own genetic material. And our genetic material's time model is faithful to the facts of nature because our genetic material was shaped by the architectonic, the dynamic of nature. So it isn't that we are decoding an occult Chinese oracle to suggest a revision of physical laws. It's that pictorially, or how do I want to say it, symbolically embedded in this Chinese oracle is the same structure that is symbolically embedded in our own genetic structure. It's just that from the I Ching, it is more easy for us to extract it. It's as though it's a Rosetta Stone into allowing us to decipher not the dynamics of the I Ching, but the dynamics of human organism and experience as it is modulated by the structure of our own DNA. And so in a sense, DNA is almost, you could say, a kind of hyper-intelligent being or community in which we are embedded with the illusion of our individual consciousness, but that what history is a kind of morphogenetic unfolding, not of the individual through embryogenesis and maturity, but a morphogenetic unfolding of the species through time, that is under the control of something beyond the reach of rational inspection and the ego. How do things come into existence, and how do they maintain themselves, and how do they disappear, and what is the unfolding of the world as we experience it? My approach to all this had just simply been to take a what can you show me approach. A real index of intelligence is humor. You know, it requires great affection for people and the world and the act of being, a forgivingness and a bemusement. The sure sign of the fanatic is an absence of humor or self-distancing. What is the human relationship to language, and is language hardwired, and how old is it? And I'm coming to the conclusion that part of our problem is always also our glory. Part of our problem and our glory is that we are thoroughly enmeshed in language. We are infected by a language virus big time. It's been difficult to think about this problem because in ordinary English, no distinction is made between language and speech, and that language is something very old. Bees do it, ants do it, certainly all social primates do it. Language, it's very old, and it's gestural, pheromonal, situational, always haunted by ambiguity, always open to misinterpretation. But spoken language is as modern as the bicycle pump. It is a technology. It is not basic to humanness. It's something somebody invented, probably in Africa, no more than 35,000 years ago. And it was essentially the most amazing parlor trick / technology anybody ever brought online. And what it is it's the ability to associate an acoustical signifier with an intention that it has no logical relationship to. It is simply an assigned relationship. And once it was invented, it has certain qualities that made it very hard to put it down. It's like the internet. In fact, it's part of that program of development. The previous forms of communication were gestural and touchy-feely and therefore very intimate. You couldn't make speeches. Literally, you couldn't make speeches. Spoken language works in darkness. This is a great boon on gestural communication. Apparently the rules, the syntactical rules used to organize thinking, which were very old and as Chomsky has shown do have roots in genetics, they can just as easily be used to organize acoustical modalities as neurological modalities. In other words, grammar was a control system for thought, but since it can be a control system for any serialized population of wave mechanical phenomena, it can also work for spoken speech. And so we'd find you had grammar before you had spoken speech. The grammar was already there, and the spoken speech just ran along the runnels previously reserved for thought. All of this probably under the perturbation of psychedelic chemicals back in the climax Saharan grassland of the high Paleolithic. The world is made of language, and energy follows attention. So, politicians, advertising mavens, people like this know how to sculpt expectation into self-fulfilling prophecy. And, essentially we're living inside a collective hallucination called the cultural vision. And it's sustained by languages and ideologies, and it has its own inner dynamic that's completely incomprehensible to anyone outside of it, and makes perfect sense to everyone inside of it. So for instance, flashback to the 14th century, trying animals for murder and shaving your head and wearing starched wigs and believing that God was in his heaven and the Pope was in Rome. This all made perfect sense to people. It was a cultural hallucination of some sort. Where the problem has come, and it's come with increasing frequency since the invention of civilization, is the cultural illusion is fine until someone comes who isn't sharing the hallucination, and they carry with them cognitive dissonance. And in early civilizations, it was probably traders. You had these folks over here at and they all were living in one hallucination, and somebody here at Eridu had it. But then these guys would come who it wasn't working in their heads like it was for everybody else. But they were necessary because they brought dope, basically, and news and dope. In other words, commodities and information. Now in the modern world, what we have is not a culture, but a megaculture, where these balkanized epistemologies, like over here people are practicing voodoo, over here they're practicing quantum physics, and here Mormonism, these are balkanized epistemologies, are all trying to coexist with each other under a meta-framework of democratic liberalism. And these memes are furiously competing. Almost all of them, whatever their apparent freight, are creatures of one dimension or two dimensions. The psychedelic meme seems to be different because it proceeds from an experience, not an ideological or doctrinal position, but an experience that is as easily accessed by the critic as the believer. This is unique. If you're not a Mormon, you can't touch the heart of Mormonism. If you're not a Scientologist, you can't touch the heart of Scientology. If you're a critic of psychedelics and you have the guts, you can certainly touch the heart of psychedelica. You simply have to bolt down the 5 dried grams and shut up, and it will overtake you. So in terms of power in the social milieu, this meme has enormous power. It seems to be, it's like a religion with a God that is alive. So there is no need to mediate it through a priesthood, no need to have exegesis, no sacred book is necessary. Maria Sabina says the mushroom is the book, and she was illiterate, but she swore that on mushrooms she read from a book. The psilocybin did was it changed the behavior of human beings, and consequently the way in which they met the natural selective processes in the environment was different. In other words, you could almost say they became a different creature through chemical modification, and that pushed them in a different direction. As to whether or not I dreamed this up on the natch or through the inspiration of psilocybin, I don't think I do much on the natch, actually. It's sort of hard for me to separate it out. I mean, these ideas come. My relationship to ideas is entirely, I view them as something exterior to myself. I don't make them up. I hunt them. I encounter them. My image this is just my image of the good psychedelic traveler. It's the image of a fisherman. And what you do in taking the psychedelic, it's the equivalent of rowing out on a dark ocean with your nets. And then you let your nets down, and then you wait. And that's a beautiful experience, to be alone on the moonlit sea with your nets spread. If nothing more than that comes of it, it's worth the trip. But every once in a while, something will blunder into the nets. Well, you don't want minnows, like a 5-hour meditation on why does your little finger just fit your nostril, and the technological implications of that. On the other hand, you don't want Leviathan. You don't want to be pulled to the bottom of the sea by something so appalling and beyond your cognitive ability to process that it just leaves you like somebody in an H.P. Lovecraft short story, only able to gibber and weep in your locked cell. You don't want that. I mean, I'm very aware of this possibility. I know that if I took mushrooms, well, like in my home in Hawaii is a perfect example. If I took mushrooms every day or every other day, that within a very short time, I could become completely incomprehensible to other human beings. I mean, I could become the monk on Cold Mountain. So could you. Nature speaks through each one of us and attempts to completely download its essence. And if the best you can do is draw a circle, that rests, that counts. Better would be to draw a circle with a cross in the middle. Better still, and you see where I'm leading, in other words, the more complex the totality symbol you can generate, the truer it is in some sense. So we could say that Newton's physics is a totality symbol generated out of his psyche, and in fact truly reflects the movement of the planets and the stars. So one way of thinking of the time wave is it's simply a complex totality symbol generated out of a spectacularly peculiar individuation process that was triggered by psychedelic experimentation. The time wave is my best trick, and it's entirely mine. In other words, it's entirely the mushrooms, but it all came down through me. And it has many peculiar implications, but one thing nobody seems to have ever noticed is that it has really peculiar implications for the person who discovers it. Because it's sort of like, Madame Curie was killed by radium because she discovered it, and in the act of discovering it was so involved with it that it took her life. Well, this isn't quite that simple, but to be the discoverer of the time wave, if it's true, is a very strange position to be in. Well, so then what I had at that point was about an 8-foot-long piece of graph paper covered by very fine lines in 8 colors on 3 levels with tiny crab-like labeling and hexagrams and this thing, which I used to carry around. And I would corner people in fast food restaurants, and I could take hold of roomfuls of people and basically hold them prisoner in a much less gentle way than I'm doing to you now. And my friends were having meetings on the subject of what is to be done. Because I would unroll this thing in front of people with a broad smile and say, you want to see a map of time? You want to see the future history of the world, the fall of Atlantis, Lincoln's hiccup? Here it is. And and I still have this thing. It's very interesting. The way I decided the end point was I had a notion of the last 2,000 years of history of where the novelty was. In other words, I had a theory of history. I felt that the most novel periods were the 20th century, it seems obvious, the Renaissance, the sciences, technologies, colonization, exploration. I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm just saying that that was where the novelty breakthrough, another one came. And the other one was Plato's Athens, ancient Greece. Get this, there was a moment around 533 BC when Plato, Aristotle, Lao Tzu, Mencius, Ezekiel, Mahavira, the Jain prophet in India, and several other lesser luminaries could have all sat down and hoisted a beer together. In other words, they were all alive in this one moment. Anyway, you get the idea. There was this incredible clustering of brilliance, and it falls, I said that also has to fall in a novelty trough. So with just those 3 points, the 20th century, the Italian Renaissance, and 535 BC, I searched the wave. And then when I got a good fit, I would look at other things. The fall of Rome, the rise of the Maya, just other things, with the idea that finer and finer things would be fitted when I got the right fit. And finally I got a fit so right that I could go right down to political events weeks old, and it all seemed to fit. So then I said, okay, this is, in my humble opinion, the best fit. And then I rushed to see where the end point was. Of course, anyone would. That was the big question. So now we've got the best fit. Now the biggest secret of all time will now be revealed by simply looking at the end of the wave. And it said, December 21st, 2012. Well, then it was pointed out to me that this is the end date of the 5,336-year calendrical round of the Maya, to the day. So then that was very it's hard to know what to make of something like that. The only thing I share in common with the Maya is that we both use mushrooms. They did, I do. So then it raises a question almost of preposterous dimensions. It's like, if you take enough mushrooms, do you eventually get to a barcode which says, download the following message before December 21st, 2012 local calendar time? And then why? Is it possible that we are genetically very close to some new form of consciousness that would simply involve a 1 or 2 gene mutation that would swap out a certain amount of serotonin for a more efficient neurotransmitter? Because in the course of my business, first of all, I pay a lot of attention to my own mind, but then I talk to a lot of people. And every once in a while I'll get somebody who says, well, I understand everything you're saying, and I've never taken a psychedelic drug, but I see things and I know things. And at first I was just sort of gently dismiss these people. But I think that it's very hard to know what someone else's internal horizon of transcendence is like. I mean, for instance, do you think your thoughts or do you see your thoughts? And what percentage would you say of your thoughts you see or you think? And are those who think their thoughts different from those who see their thoughts? Chemically different? Genetically different? One of the things that's so fascinating about ayahuasca is when you go to the Aboriginal setting and you take it with the people, they sing. That's their thing to do on it. They sing. And the pattern of the ritual, which isn't much of a ritual, is basically they sing, and then when they're tired of singing, there's like a break, and people go out and take a leak, and people smoke cigarettes, and then they start singing again. And in the course of these breaks, you'll hear people say of the song, that's what they always talk about, is the song, and somebody will say something, well, I liked the olive drab part with the silver piping, but I thought that the use of yellow with magenta in a coda like that was completely inappropriate. You think, this is a critique of a song? And then as you spend time with it and you realize that the sound is not the point. The sound is an artifact of a technology for making visual modalities. And that what these people are doing is some kind of pictorial telepathy. They are creating and amusing each other with hallucinations that they acoustically generate and adjust for each other's amusement. And you can do it. It's something ayahuasca makes possible, so that you can sit in a darkened room and project a tone like, and slowly this blue ribbon will descend approximately to a foot wide and 10 feet in front of you. And then by varying it, you can make a change, and you discover a grammar between acoustical production and visual effect. And you quit, within 10 minutes, you're jamming, you've got it going, you've set the tone. So what's happening there is that under the influence of this substance, these plants, which mimic neurohumoral substrates, a synesthesia of a very profound sort is taking place. You're seeing sound. And there are aspects of this that are profound in the sense that intention is now beheld rather than being heard. You see, if you use acoustical language to communicate, notice that is small mouth noises. And the idea, for instance, right now, the idea that I'm communicating with you depends on a very dodgy concept or assumption. It's the assumption that our dictionaries match. And our dictionaries don't match. Why should they? You went to school one place, I went to school another place. Your experience is different from my experience. But we must make this assumption in order to even play at communicating. One of the most uncool things you can do in most communicating environments is to stop the show and say to somebody, "Excuse me, would you explain to me what I just said?" And then people go ashen because, there's not the chance of that. And then the whole game breaks down and it's exposed that, we might as well be sending smoke signals. But if you could spatially and visually communicate in a kind of sculptural mode, the level of ambiguity is inherently reduced. We no longer are relying on a shared dictionary. We are both contemplating the same object. As an example, this could be argued against by a maniac, but I think the point is fairly clear. If I read you a paragraph from Proust, let's say, then we could spend the rest of the afternoon talking about what does the author mean. But if I show you a piece of sculpture, we walk around it, and its implications may require discussion, but its essential being as an object is much more unambiguous. So I think part of the evolution of consciousness, our subject for today, I remind you, is a refinement and a filling in of language. A new dimension of linguistic robustness can come out of the psychedelic experience to make communication a more telepathic and synesthesic phenomenon. We who are the rational skeptics who are out of the loop on this one, something is going on, something very much like communication between human beings and plants. This is what I call the Gaian mind. And it's what we have lost contact with through our civilized lifestyle and our avoidance of wilderness and our insistence on media overload and so forth and so on. But if you go into the wilderness, even without psychedelics, alone, and stay there days, people say, well, one goes mad. Well, what they mean is one experiences phenomena that are not socially acceptable in the context of civilized existence. The trees do whisper their secrets. The river does tell its story. And this has been studied even. There's a book, I can't remember who wrote it, called The Felt Presence in Unusual Environments. And it studies, everybody from Guinea Highlanders to New Yorkers. And this is something that happens to human beings in unfamiliar environments, a hackle-raising sense of a presence that can then lead on to an episode of communication. As long as we have civilization, we will have psychochemistry from here on out. So it's up to us to manage that. One way of managing it, I think, is to exhibit enough sense to come in out of the rain. So why don't we? Doesn't that seem like a reasonable high consciousness move at this point? I think this is impossible, Schwan. Okay. Creative dreaming in the presence of technology is a place where, haunted by genies, genies that will wrap you in the blanket of their mysterium and lead you forward. This has always been known. I mean, alchemy, interestingly, is about, of all the traditions of the West, it maintains a kind of shamanic connection. The alchemist, the artificer, is aided by demons, D-E-A-M-O-N-S, the demons of artifice, Blake called them. And they teach you how to make things. But, as was discussed yesterday, is it a con? Whose agenda does it serve? They only teach you to make certain things which amuse their demon aesthetic. And so, our progress into the domain of techne has been at the behest of this unseen companion and its curious obsessions. But to make machines smaller, tighter, the Swiss have been at this for a while, but the best Pierre Cardin watch is gross beyond all imagining compared to nanotechnology. We need to build an environment where we can produce acoustical signals that we can see and play with in real time. And I've seen, and you probably have too, things somewhat like this. I've seen spaces that you could dance into and create a visual impression on a screen. In other words, a system of lasers is being interfered with by your body, and it's being uploaded into a complex hallucination-like piece of performance art. But I think we need to push on visual language. I think this is what these elf things want us to do. And that, you see, from an engineer's point of view, what we're talking about here is what's called bandwidth. And bandwidth is more and more the problem. Bandwidth is how fast you can move information between 2 points. And the more bandwidth you have, the more complicated and detailed the information you can move is. When I speak to you, This is one of the most inefficient forms of communication ever invented. We're going here at about 30 baud. 30 to 40 baud. Baud, the baud rate means bits per second. A standard modem operates somewhere between 14,400 baud and 28,800 baud. An ISDN line is 5 times faster than the upper end of that. T1 is 10 times faster than that. Bandwidth allows depth of field, and communicating at 30 baud with an acoustical signal of small mouth noises it's amazing that we can crawl onto the theater of discourse and claim to be communicating at all. And yet, notice, we have built a global civilization on small mouth noises and the consultation of local dictionaries. In other words, we don't even have a shared sense of meaning. When I talk and you listen, and you think you understand, the unspoken assumption is that your dictionary and mine is the same. And since we're all English speakers, it's maybe 60% true. But since you're of one tribe and I'm of one from the other side of the planet, we don't even have the comfort of local associations. And so as you listen, you strive for a kind of internationalizing of your dictionary. And as I speak, I try to be as non-colloquial and self-referential as possible and speak a kind of standard international English. My private, with less willingness to argue it strenuously in front of straight people, I certainly agree with you that extraterrestrial intervention of some kind is possible. I'm uncomfortable with arguing it because my fellow extraterrestrial enthusiasts are such a disgrace to intellectual discourse. I mean, they're a bunch of squirrels, you know? And also, the extraterrestrials, they wish to champion these gray-faced proctologists from other star systems who pay house calls in the middle of the night. That's absurd. And it's also incredibly pedestrian. It's so like human beings. Real aliens are really alien. They don't care about our reproductive processes or how much coal we're mining, or they don't want to take a piece of tissue out of your belly button or anything like that. They're so alien that the trick is to even establish any commonality of interest whatsoever. So there seem to be two things happening. A very subtle penetration of human consciousness and institutions by a very alien something, which may have its roots in the organization of the human psyche, or may have been spawned yonder of Zenebel-Ganubi. But whatever it is, it's subtle. Meanwhile, there's something else going on. A kind of syncretic religious hysteria based on unbalanced personalities willing to put forth fantastic paranoid hallucinations that they gather other soft-headed folk to their flock, and then this becomes a source of epistemological degradation in the cultural dialogue, because these people are bananas in some sense, you know. And interestingly, highly phobic of psychedelic drugs. I mean, I have made the mistake of agreeing to speak at UFO conferences. And, you know, it's the most bizarre and regimented group of people. I mean, I don't know how they manage it. First of all, the faith is that metal ships from other star systems are visiting this planet to help us with the culture crisis. I mean, it's 1940s male engineering mentality, and it's Flash Gordon's suit. And if you suggest anything about a psychic dimension to it, or, oh, well, you're one of those people, and it's just completely dismissed. And you go to these UFO conferences, and you go into the exhibition hall, and at table 1, Commander Zero of the planet Themidia has his plan for mankind. 12 feet away at table 2, the Zeta Reticuli people, an entirely different message, different. Table 3, the Palladians, they're big, and you see, what happened to what's called the principle of parsimony? You understand what I mean? In other words, well, the principle of parsimony says the simplest explanation should always be preferred unless evidence accumulates otherwise. This sort of leads on to a minor obsession of mine, which is, it has to do with this raises the issue, this whole question of the paranormal. And psychedelic people are of many minds about the paranormal. Some psychedelic people feel no need to entertain its existence at all. Others are constantly consulting pendulums, so forth and so on. In the matter of anomalies, I've found a nearly foolproof way to get to the bottom of any given paranormal claim. But people don't like my method very well. It has to do with concentrating on the personality of the witness. We are incredibly naive about the phenomenon of witnessing. So, say, this afternoon I go on a hike by myself up into the sandstone, and then I come back wild-eyed at evening and say that I saw a ship of some kind, and then I tell you a story. I dare say, probably, you would believe, in some sense, this story. But why should you? And in fact, how much do you know about me and my need for self-esteem, my history of lying, my history of having strange things happen to me, the fact that I was molested by an uncle at age 11, wasn't everybody, this kind of thing, in other words. And so constantly people are telling me about, or reporting in the media, stories. A flying saucer was seen over village so-and-so last night, reported by several residents. But it's this kind of reportage assumes that people are like cameras. But people are not like cameras. People are nexi of psychological complexes, fears, self-doubt, delusion, illusion, religious upbringing, so forth and so on. And I guess because I'm in a kind of a position where I can meet anybody in those places that I might care to, it's like you get to go behind the scenes. It's like going backstage at a rock and roll concert, Well, then what you discover is all of these people are incredibly grotesque and complicated and conflicted and bizarre. And, to think of them as Joe Ordinary cheerfully explaining the aerial phenomenon, the past stories, it's not how it is. I mean, these are people who've, earlier were into Wicca and then spent some time in a tantric ashram in Uzbekistan, and later had an affair with the Iranian ambassador's daughter, and they were running heroin from Nigeria, and he had had to do a little time in Djibouti, and you just realize, these people are so complicated that any story told, it definitely serves many, many agendas. And, you specifically mentioned Whitley Strieber. He is a very, very, very peculiar person. You have to spend no more than 3 minutes with him to realize that that the issue is the person telling the story. And I found out with crop circles and with lots and lots of things, drag in the witnesses and don't ask them what they saw. Ask them what kind of childhood they had and what their religious upbringing was and how, what they think about Atlantis and stuff like that. And it begins to unfold in sort of a different way. We're very naive about narrative, and we're very naive about reporting the world to each other. We don't understand that if you apply consciousness to any single thing, it gives way to a spaghetti of ambiguity that down at the quantum mechanical level, everything turns into everything else. Well, so simple stories and simple thoughts about them are usually so low definition that the meat of it, the meaning, is somehow betrayed. The aliens of psilocybin are much more alien. They're not hominids. They're not interested in how many atomic power plants we use or how we excrete or reproduce. They're really alien. And the trick is to know when you're looking at it. That's always the trick. I have often in my mind the image of the world's largest radio telescope is at Arecibo, Puerto Rico, and it's used to search for extraterrestrial radio signals. And it's so big, this massive metal structure, that it's hung in a round valley on these towers so that it can be manipulated. And it's hung in this round valley that they scooped out with bulldozers and made a perfect bowl. And then they planted grass under the telescope in this bowl, and they put cattle on the grass to keep it short. So here's the world's largest radio telescope staring out at NGC 3264 with a 6 billion channel signal analyzer, searching the noise that drifts between the stars for some clue to extraterrestrial intelligence. Meanwhile, 200 feet below the telescope, in the dung of the cattle, perfect specimens of Stropharia cubensis are proliferating furiously, being gathered by the locals and sold to tourists who talk to extraterrestrials back in their motel rooms. To my mind, what shamans are, on one level, is people who, given local language difficulties and so forth and so on, but people who can see the end. A shaman is one who sees the end. How do you see the end? Well, you have to go stand in a very high place, dimensionally speaking, drug-wise or ordeal-wise. In other words, from the high peaks of hyperspace, the end is just over yonder. But once you can see the end, it makes you into a different kind of person. My prediction is that as we approach 2012, things will just get nuttier and nuttier and nuttier. And this is why part of my message is all about clear thinking, analytical razors. Don't go running off after Babaji this or Mother that, because as we get, the way I think of the eschatological object at the end of time, the attractor is, those mirrored balls that they hang in clubs, rave clubs, that they spin, and then it throws myriads of reflections on the wall. Well, as we approach the attractor, it gives off, in alchemical terms, scintilla, sparks, which are distorted images of itself. And all culture is a distorted image of the eschaton. I mean, when we reach the eschaton, we will discover we are the eschaton. There will be no sense of, there'll no handshake exactly. When we reach it, we will discover we are it. So our aspirations toward good and evil and all this, everything is just going to be exacerbated to an excruciating level of intensity. And, you know, people all around you will be converting to cults, taking drugs, piercing themselves, having transsexual operations, religious experiences, inheriting money, losing money, getting diseases, getting cured, having channeling experiences, just endless, this stuff. And until we reach, and then there will become, as when you break through the sound barrier or something, in 2012, I think, it's like, wow, you break through the history thing. History, which has been, you know, when you fly a supersonic, the Q force goes up, 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 and then it just stops and it falls, and you break through, and now you're doing 780, 790, 800, 810, 820 miles per hour. The sound barrier is behind you, and the ship just moves like greased lightning. Well, after 2012, I'll be 65, 30 days before the end date, and I just think the intellectually decent and correct thing after dominating this rap for 45 years would be to retire.